Coming up, just when you thought you'd heard it all, it turns out there's more to the story. Our panel of experts returns for night 2 of a special edition of Current Events on B Squared. And it all starts right now. Greetings and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Brandon Bridges, and this is B Squared. So this one's been a long time coming. That's what happens when real life and its schedules kind of dictate what you can and can't do. But we're here, we're back, and this is going to be a great show. So our panel of experts return. You may recognize K-Far and Blue Bacon, and we actually have a new face among us tonight, Paul Carroll, who is a practicing attorney, but I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, so we'll let everybody introduce themselves. But first, I want to thank everybody for coming back tonight. We had a great time last time, and hopefully we'll have a good time this time. And if we do manage to have a good time, it'll be because of you guys. It won't be because of the bumbling, stumbling host. So, glad to have everybody back tonight.
Good to be back.
So, just for benefit of my audience and anyone who may not know you guys, why don't you take a minute to reintroduce yourselves and throw in some plugs for your channels if you got them.
Yeah, K-Far, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, great. I was going to suggest you go first.
That's too late. Right. Beat you to it.
I'm K-Far, Navy vet, worked at a police station for a few years. Came up watching Blue Bacon, Kick, Schrodinger's Cat, everybody like that. And now I'm here, K-Far on the YouTube, K-Far_YouTube on the Instagram, and that's it.
All right, I'll take it from here. It's fine. Thanks, Paul. Leaving me high and dry there. Blue Bacon. I am a veteran of 6 years active duty military police. I still work with the National Guard. Do all sorts of crazy stuff with them. A lot of fun. Talk to me. I'll recruit you. No. I go over. What do I go over my channel, which is Blue Bacon on YouTube, by the way, and just fun law stuff that I find. Sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's serious, mostly it isn't, and it's a good time. If you go check it out, you see what you like, keep coming back for more.
A good word for Blue Bacon's channel is fun, because that's what it is. It's I have yet to see him make a boring video, so coming from me, that's high praise because I have the attention span of a gnat and a brain about the same size as one. What's that?
If you go back far enough, they're atrocious.
A challenge.
I've improved. Oh, God.
And actually, speaking of improvement, so the last time we saw Blue Bacon, he had just developed a voice-activated coin flipper. Well, now he's got something on his set that can actually flip coins in real life. Is that right?
Well, at the moment, it's me.
At the moment.
I'm the coin flipper. I have it. You can't see it, but you might be able to hear it. It is not it was operational, and then my computer died, and I have to rewrite the code to make it happen. Probably do it better because it was not great, but it was functional. It's not great.
Well, say it with me. That's why we love technology.
Yay! It's fun though. It's fun. It's good stuff. We have fun.
And that's a good example.
Hopefully you didn't sink too much money into that R&D budget.
Right?
What budget?
And that's a good example of what you find when you go to Blue Bacon's channel. He's always improving things, always looking for something else to enhance his presentation. So I tune in because he has a setup that is technologically sophisticated and frankly is the envy of pretty much every other channel I've been on. So yeah. So good job, Blue Bacon.
Thank you.
So Paul, the newcomer, how about you?
Hello, my name is Paul Carroll. I am a licensed attorney in Ohio and Minnesota. I originally grew up in Minnesota and then moved out to Ohio. In Minnesota, I practiced primarily estate planning and guardianship and conservatorship law in private practice, and since coming to Ohio, I have joined the government and I work as a prosecutor.
And folks in the Frauditor and Sovcits community may recognize Paul's name. Yes, he is the self-same Paul that was on Blue Bacon's stream helping dismantle, if that's even a strong enough term, the indestructible trifold of a certain glasses-wearing, headphone-topped individual who I won't name, but who I think everybody could probably identify. Blue Bacon, is that a fair description?
That's pretty fair. Yeah. We can add fugitive to that list. Oh man, we can give him so many titles. But yeah, no, that's fair.
We could give him a lot of titles, and the one I like to give him is Idjit with a J. So there we go.
I think we demonstrated that not only is the paper on which the trifold is written questionably indestructible, but so is the logic.
What logic? So we've got a panel of experts, if ever there was such a panel, and I say it every time, but if you haven't subscribed to their channels, go and subscribe to their channels. And that goes triple for Kfar, because this is like, I'm pretty sure this is like his 4th time on the channel. So anyone who hasn't subscribed to his channel by now, 5th, I told you, I can't count. I mean, there are days when I'm lucky to remember what day of the week it is, much less what month it is or year, because those are all numbers. But now, if you haven't subscribed to Kfar by now, you pretty much fail at life. So once this show ends, go subscribe to Kfar. Go subscribe to Blue Bacon too while you're at it. So thank you, fellas, for being here tonight. This is going to be a good one. The enthusiasm is just overwhelming. Cool deal. So, the last time we were all together, the conclusion that we came to was that when it comes to First Amendment auditors, or frauditors as we like to call them, there's most definitely a profit motive at work. And I really think that's probably the worst part of what we see with frauditors, because if they were really in for it for the reasons that they claim, their behavior would be a lot better. But something to take a look at beyond that is, even when you factor in what someone does for money, their choice of activity is inevitably motivated by some sort of personality quirk or personal interest or something along those lines. So what I wanted to look at tonight was kind of the motive behind the motive and what drives these people to do the crazy and outlandish things they do. And I wanted to start by taking a look at kind of an offshoot, if you will, of the Frauditer and Sovcit community. Let's talk about your friends and mine, the cart narcs. Who has ever heard of those people?
Me. Yes.
All right, so since I know I would mangle any description I tried to give, Blue Bacon, why don't we do it from your perspective? Why don't you fill us in a little bit on who and what the cart narcs are?
Well, I'm not exactly the expert on it. I've seen a few videos, and I enjoy them from a not necessarily like that's the correct thing to do perspective, more that I find it amusing in its own way. I like to put my carts away. I think other people should as well. When you're out shopping, don't just leave your cart there, put it away. And someone has taken that idea and they've gone to the extreme. They put on a vest and some identifying stuff that says, I'm a cart narc. And they go and they confront people who don't put their carts away, and they say, oh, sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to stop you right there. You got to put your cart back in the cart place. They might put magnets on vehicles. Like, I didn't put my cart away. There's your magnet. They might block vehicles in so that, like, oh, you didn't put your cart away. Here you go. Now it's behind your vehicle. You can't back out until you move your cart. And I appreciate the idea of being like, hey, like, we're part of a society. Do your part. However, it does get into a criminal element. Certainly harassment. Some of these videos. There's a lot that is not good per se. It's entertaining, but not necessarily something that I would recommend. And I actually intended to do a video on it, and I never did. But now this is it. This is my video on it.
Well, you're in the right place to do a video on stuff, so there you go. And I think it's fair to say that, kind of like we said last time, when it comes to a concept or an idea or anything that you might do, it's okay as long as you do it within a reasonable quantity. And the cart narcs, I think, are a good example of what can happen when an idea or a concept gets taken to an illogical extreme.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the best way to put it.
And so, since you mentioned the C word, criminal aspect,
yes.
Talk to us a little bit about that, because I know from the perspective of a Leo, you've probably got a unique perspective on that aspect of this.
Well, Paul will definitely be able to talk about this as well. Because the Cartnarks, it's mostly one guy, my understanding. I could be wrong about this. I've just seen a few episodes of the stuff they put out, right? Episodes, videos. And they travel around the country. I think most of it might be California. I definitely have seen some stuff in Texas. And it occasionally gets dangerous. He had a gun drawn on him at one point, and someone's like, I'm going to put bullets in your head. And I don't remember if they said it in a way that was technically criminally liable, or they would be criminally liable as a criminal threat. But essentially, look, if you are like, hey, man, you didn't put your card away, and they're like, that sucks. And then you block them in, and then they get out and they move the cart, and you block them in again, and then you do the same thing. And then you put stickers or magnets on their vehicle. Magnets, not stickers. Stickers would be its own thing. And you're doing this, you're going to get that person upset. And we see it every single time almost. This person getting very, very upset. And sure, of course they are, because this person is interacting with them about this thing that they don't want to interact with. They're trying to leave. They're being prevented from leaving. And sure, I get it. I want people to put their carts away too. But after the first time, be like, hey, can you put your cart away? And they go, no. If I'm continuously engaging in a pattern of behavior that is likely to cause them some sort of mental distress, in some places, that is criminal harassment. In some places, it would be criminal stalking of some sort. Perhaps, I think Ohio has menacing statutes that it could fall under. It would be tricky potentially in a lot of these places because it might require some sort of threat of harm. But in some states, it only requires a reasonable person to go through some sort of mental stress or distress due to these repeated actions. And that's a very fine line to walk. And I think that's a very avoidable line to walk. And this person, who's running this Cartnarks channel, is intentionally going out and putting people through this stress, which, justified or not, might meet these criminal elements. And that's really the issue. Is I get it. I get the idea. I like the idea of being like, hey, let's do our part. But like you said, it's taken to an extreme, oftentimes an unacceptable extreme, in my opinion.
So, in other words, it's what KFAR would call dumb shit.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah. So for me, it's like Cartnarks found a thing that they thought was funny or amusing. I just had to look them up just because I was unaware of how popular they are. They have like 350,000 subscribers, 41 million views. It seems like they took what was funny and kind of lost track of where the line was while doing it, because in my head they're getting a decent check from the old YouTube from doing what they're doing, and they just kind of lost the line, or the line got blurred for them. And
collectively, I think you both just gave a fantastic definition of kind of how frauditors operate. They do things that are not completely unnecessary, but that are unnecessary, and they subject others to it, to the distress and irritation, and I think that's being generous, of their victims. I don't like using the V word, but I don't know a better one to use. And the example that I like to cite is, I wish I could remember all the people involved. It was a video that I first saw from the late great Schrodinger's cat of Josh Abrams and Breaking the Flaw, I think the guy's name was. The guy with those silly looking glasses and the ponytail that was shrieking and howling and having what Tones Over thinks it called a petulant meltdown over his phone. That video, they walked into a police lobby, they pointed to a sign that was in front of the window and said, that violates the First Amendment, or my First Amendment right. Remove it, please. And it's like, who the heck do you think you are to walk into a place that's functioning just fine without you and start stirring up trouble?
So, for me, it's kind of, oh my lord, drawing a blank here. Oh, like I said in the last video, there's no qualification or certification to be an auditor. So they have no business or any right or any qualification to tell you anything. Most of them, not all, but most, have a criminal past. So it's like, the only thing you're qualified to tell me to do is not to do this thing that you did to get charged. Like, that's it.
Yeah, and I've seen debates in the past about, in kind of the same way as to the chicken and the egg scenario, what came first, disrespect for authority or frauditing? And specifically, was it an encounter with the law that started them on the path to frauditing, or did the path to frauditing lead them to encounters with the law?
I think the auditing movement started out of a place of legitimacy, where you had, police officers doing the wrong thing, and sure, it happens, and you want to document it so you can hold them accountable. You do have First Amendment right to petition the government for redress grievances, and documenting the activities through reasonable filming is a great way to do that, to hold them accountable. And I think that there were issues where police were doing the wrong thing, and there were also issues where police were arresting people who were filming them based on certain interpretations of laws that would probably cover some sort of not eavesdropping. I forget what laws they are, but technically some of them could be interpreted that way, and police did. And I think that was a bad call. And a lot of courts have ruled on this issue. Not the Supreme Court, to my knowledge. I don't think it's made it all the way through that, but certainly it's gotten pretty high in a lot of places. And the general accepted ruling is that when a police officer is in a public place doing their job, and you're not unreasonably interfering with that, you can film them. That has not been ruled everywhere. I'm not going to say that, yes, this is 100% throughout the United States a fact, but that's generally what the ruling is. So people have gone out and been like, oh, well, I can do that. I'm going to prove that I can do that because there were issues in the past at these locations. And I think that's where it sort of went downhill, because you have these people who have had a lot of problems with law enforcement and authority, who don't understand the system, who are mad. They see this and they go, I want to also catch police doing bad things, so I feel justified that I'm not the person who is a problem. My past isn't my fault. No, it's law enforcement's. That's what I'm going to justify. And then once that happens, you draw a huge community of people who want to watch that kind of thing. And then you get the money, and then it escalates from there. So I think it probably came from a place of legitimacy, and then was just overrun by people who had no idea what they were doing and weren't interested in the original idea at all.
And you just gave a good description of the legitimate underpinnings that brought us to where we are today. I think that's a good jumping off point to start looking at the motive behind the motive, because you look at some of these people, and I could reach into a hat and draw out pretty much any name, and I think what I'm getting ready to say would apply. But I also think that when you look at some of these people and you see their interactions with others, it almost looks to me like they do what they do as, I don't want to say as a power trip, but I don't know the right words to use. Maybe a better way to say it is they're covering for insecurities, and the only way that they can feel powerful is by beating people over the head with what they think is an inalienable right. Tell me that made sense.
Yeah, I think that
yeah, definitely.
In a lot of situations will be the case. A lot of these auditors are people who have some sort of issue financially or mentally or educationally, if that you can apply it that way. Not all of them are terribly bright. Not all of them are able to function well in society. And certainly this isn't applying to everyone that does auditing. There are some excellent auditors out there, truly, that I'm all for until I'm not. I'm not saying I will always be all for them, but there's some that I'm like, yeah, auditing when done lawfully is lawful. So, okay. And there are some that do it really, really well and actually are addressing things and trying to learn and trying to better the community by creating connections between the law enforcement officers in the area and, of course, the citizens that the law enforcement officers are, interacting with in their jurisdiction. And that sort of connection, fantastic. Absolutely. Yes. And the officers should know that, the citizens are paying attention. And the citizens should know how the officer's job works. And it's great. And so there are auditors that actually go out and do that, and it's fantastic. And sure, like Kfar said, there are no real certifications to do this. But if you're willing to learn, I don't have a problem with that. It's the ones who aren't willing to learn and say, I'm good enough with my lack of anything. But you have these auditors who cannot function, cannot integrate into society. And all of a sudden, here's a way for them to make money by doing a thing that they love, which is not fitting into society. Boom. There you go. There's your motivation.
Yeah. And Paul, I think, said it best that some of these individuals have been deemed domestic terrorists, and rightly so, I think. But Paul, from your perspective, what from your experience are some of the grossest excesses of these groups that have led to that designation?
So, primarily, the people who I think earn the label of domestic terrorist are the ones who solely actively use violence. I mean, there are instances like the 2010 shooting of 2 officers by a father and son sovereign citizen combination on a routine traffic stop. And there are multiple instances. I believe that was the Kane family, those 2 who committed the shooting. But it's when they use violence that it reaches that perspective. The people who are just auditing in the sense that they are only recording the police, certainly I don't think anybody would apply a label of domestic terrorism to them, but it's the underlying ideology of the legitimacy, or illegitimacy, I should say, of part or all of the government that is underlying in both sovereign citizens, auditors. They feel that there's some portion of the government that has either been falsely implemented, overstepped its bounds, some action that has caused the government to no longer be legitimate, that they then think it's justified to react with varying degrees of force to prevent the perceived tyranny as they see it.
And I couldn't let a mention of violence go by without referencing Chauncey Dragonfire, or as he describes himself, the law offices of Daddy and Master. A definite power trip if ever I saw one. But does that name ring a bell for anybody but me?
I'm not familiar with that one.
No, I'm not familiar either.
So I actually get to feel smart for a minute, because I've seen a video that nobody else has seen. So this guy is a First Amendment auditor, but he is one that resorts to violence like nothing. And at one point, he actually physically hit someone with his monopod. And in the he was arrested, and at one point he was in prison. I mean, I know that's a common thing with all of these people, but he, from the news coverage that I remember seeing, he was, his family was afraid of him because they said that he was violent and unstable and unhinged. Again, hardly a set of traits unique to him. But just a bad dude. And when you were talking about people who engage in violence, this guy is a 1A frauditor that seems to fit that mold. But what about the
really short guy? Schrodinger covered him a while ago.
Yep.
I think he just got out.
Oh, really?
If I recall, if it's the same guy, I think he just got out.
I hadn't.
So we shall see if he goes back to it. But
I'll keep an eye out for that, yeah.
I had not heard that he'd gotten out, so you've just told me something I did not know.
So much for feeling smart.
I know. Yeah. I'm back to my default mode, which is feeling very dumb. So, no, if he is one that I think would make for good content for Kfar or for Blue Bacon, certainly. So go forth and have fun.
And one of the primary dangers that I see with the sovereign citizen auditor community is the potential for violence. Mm-hmm. And especially the potential for what they view as legitimate violence. One of the best examples I've seen of this cycle, this progressive cycle of sort of descent into an echo chamber of this ideology is the case of Michael Wayne Parsons. If you guys haven't seen videos on this, there's a channel called Frater, Frater, something to that effect, who has all of these audio recordings of various court proceedings and recorded phone calls that Parsons has had with other people. But he started in 2007 running for the executive of whatever county in Tennessee he was in. So he's an active, legitimate participant in the government process. But then he loses the election, views the election as corrupt because he lost it, and then starts to think that he sees corruption everywhere in the county. And at one point, he and his wife were raising wolf hybrids on their property, and some escape, and a neighbor shoots and kills one. Well, this neighbor had supported his political opponent, so he sees more into this conspiracy, and he goes and he holds this neighbor at gunpoint, claiming to be performing a citizen's arrest. So from his perspective, he views all of these behaviors as legitimate. He ran for government, he was defeated because of because of corruption. Now his neighbor is antagonizing him, and so he's going to legitimately perform a citizen's arrest from his perspective. Well, of course, the rest of us didn't see it that way. He's charged with armed kidnapping and I think a number of other things, and he was only found guilty on some of his charges, but he wound up serving 7 years in prison or something close to that. And then when he gets out, now he has a felony label, and he gets charged with being a felon in possession of a firearm because he thinks that he is entitled to own a firearm regardless of his felon status. Well, that then leads to more charges, and at one point he tries to flee to Canada in an airplane, a single-passenger airplane, but he gets stopped in Montana while he was trying to refuel, and then charged federally as being a felon in possession of a firearm. And so currently he's in federal prison in Nebraska, I think it is, and he's not scheduled to be released until 2025. But every step of the way, he's viewing his actions as legitimate and the actions of the government as being the corrupt agents. And so that creates the cycle of him feeling more and more victimized and resorting to more and more violence to accomplish his perceived justified goals.
And that's a good example of something else that we touched on last time, but we didn't really have a lot of time to get into, and that is the general disconnect between what Frauditors and Sovcits consider acceptable and normal and what pretty much everybody else says. In my description in the opening last time, I actually came out and said it, that there are splinter groups out there that the conventions that you and me take for granted, they don't subscribe to or anything that resembles them. And it continues to blow my mind, some of the things that we see from people with that different understanding. I mean, let's take a look at Glasses and Headphones Boy. The guy got a continuance at a hearing that he missed, and they said, be here the next time, we'll reschedule this for you. But when the next hearing came about, he didn't show up, and he said it on one of his live streams, I think, that I don't want to go because they're going to revoke my bond and I'm going to get arrested and thrown in prison. Well, by not going, he basically set himself up for that to be his fate no matter what happens, because now there is a warrant for his arrest. And you want to talk about a different understanding of how reality works. Since then, as I don't actually watch his channel, but I've seen enough coverage from others to know he has made videos regularly and he has live streamed regularly. And at one point, he was openly discussing his location. It takes a special kind of dumb to do that. So what do you guys have to say about that?
Well, Chili's another example of someone who has like a degree of legitimate participation in the legal system, in the legal process, but then the echo chamber that he, I would argue, creates for himself about his perceptions of corruption drive him further down this rabbit hole where he he got to Ironton, he started trying to uncover all of the corruption that he perceived, and I'm not saying this to indicate that there isn't any corruption there, but he sees it around every corner and under every rock, and as a result, he starts to become more antagonistic towards the judge in his case, and when he received the, I would argue, legitimate criminal charges for trespass that he was dealing with, he saw the judge presiding over his court case as being corrupt and now prejudice against him, where the rest of normal people wouldn't view that situation the same way. And so because he saw this corruption, that's, to my knowledge, what caused him to avoid showing up at his own court proceedings, thereby sealing his fate, like you say, of being put in jail if he were still in that jurisdiction.
What KFAR, Blue Bacon? How about you guys?
Yeah, covers a lot of it. He hates to be wrong, but he doesn't work to better himself, really. It's just, I'm such a good person, so I should succeed because I should succeed. And he has a lot of problem with authority, being told what to do. So he can't hold a job where he would have a supervisor. So he's sort of had to create his own jobs, and he doesn't know what he's doing there. So he sort of just creates a thing. It appears he then gets other people involved and then leaves all the issues to them, takes what he got from that, jumps onto the next one. That's how it would appear. Is that how it actually works? I don't know. I've never invested in any of his nonsense. But he hates to be wrong, and he hates to be told what he can or cannot do. And as Paul said, yeah, the echo chamber that he's created for himself is pretty extreme. And I think he was doing his whole overturn Terry versus Ohio bit, and it stopped being profitable, as profitable as he wanted. So he needed to go out and do something else, which was to actually interact with people who were having alleged issues. And so to do that, he had to leave his studio or equivalent. He had to go out into the real world, and all of a sudden, oh my God, this isn't an echo chamber. People can actually tell me that I'm an idiot. And oh boy, have they. And he has responded very poorly to that. And there's a lot of, I'm going to get you, I'm going to do this. He's not a stranger to threatening people with all sorts of things. Not necessarily violence. Not necessarily not violence. But he threatens people with a lot of things. And what he seems to be threatening people with a lot now is legal battles that they'll have to fight. And I think that's a lot less threatening to most people than he thinks. But oh boy, is he trying. But he doesn't understand. He's been in the legal system. He's been arrested. He's gone through all civil, criminal. He's gone through it all. And he thinks that means he knows enough. He said he's a constitutional law scholar of 20 years. I don't think he's ever really studied law. I think he's looked up some cases and then misread them. But I think he thinks, I really started going through the system 20 years ago. And that's when I started studying. And it was, study through the, trial by fire, where I didn't actually go to school and sit down and read books. It was, I experienced it, and that's learning. And I think maybe that's what justifies that in his mind, if it's not just an outright lie. But he's experienced the court system, so he knows some buzzwords. But when it comes to actually utilizing it appropriately, oh God, no.
Yes, he seems to have been an involuntary participant in the legal system for 20 years.
So while Blue Bacon was talking, I was furiously writing things down that I didn't want to lose track of. So
fair. I don't remember what I just said. So
you said a lot of great things that were thought-provoking and accurate. So kudos.
And one thing I did want to point out about Chile specifically, the question of how the law or the legal system should be or should work is a political question. And the question of how the laws are written and are applied as they are now is a legal question. And Chile very frequently misconstrues the two, thinking that the law as it's written says something that he believes in a political sense should be the case. And that mistake has bitten him very many times already and will continue to do so as long as he's flippantly filing lawsuits with or on behalf of other people and committing these dubious legal acts like trying to draft powers of attorney for other people.
And you just hit on actually one of the things that I wrote down from Blue Bacon. So I'm glad you said that, Paul. But when you say like acting like an attorney when he's not, the thing that comes straight to mind is that video not that long ago, and I think everybody covered it, where he's in the courthouse and first the prosecutor walks by and he tries to engage him, and the prosecutor's like, I ain't got time for you. And he just walks on. Then the defense attorney comes up and Chili is trying to talk to him as if he's like counsel to counsel. And the consensus from everybody I've heard from that watched that video was that defense attorney should have looked at him and said, who the F are you? Why are you talking to me? And why should I tell you word one about this or any other legal matter? So
I agree wholeheartedly, and if anything, there's even more of a risk to Christy was the name of that client by having Chili carry on this conversation with her legitimate defense attorney, because if I'm the attorney for somebody in a criminal proceeding and I discuss that matter with my client and a third party present, that creates attorney-client confidentiality questions about whether or not privilege has been destroyed, because normally privilege only works between the attorney and the client, and if there's a third party present, it can be inferred that anything the client says to the attorney was done without the expectation of the attorney-client privilege applying. And so the prosecutor could then, if they overhear the discussion themselves in the courthouse that they're having, could legitimately question whether or not attorney-client privilege applied to the statements being made there. So it's a very realistic legal danger that Chili was putting everybody else in that regard.
And staying with the theme of Chili thinking he knows more than he really does, has everybody seen the infamous video where Chili and Kate almost got into it, or rather did get into it, and he was like, I'm gonna sue you, because that's his catchphrase.
Yes.
So things like that, and Paul, you may be able to comment on this, but let's assume that Chili does file or has filed even half the lawsuits that he claims that he was looking into. Talk to us about what his activities could do to him as far as being declared a vexatious litigant. Because from the perspective of a layman, and Kfar and Blue Bacon, please correct me if I'm mistaken in this, but from the perspective of a layman, it looks to me like a lot of his lawsuits are baseless and, like Blue Bacon said, exist more to inconvenience and annoy the defendants that he names rather than because they have any actual legal merit.
Yes. And Paul and I have gone over that, and I would like to draw attention to a video that came out today with Kate. She got the audio from the courtroom where Chili was like, oh, I want a protection order against Kate because that's what he thought was his option, his best option. And I haven't listened to all of it, but it's mostly just him going, oh, look, there's evidence. And then he shows a video and none of it establishes anything. Just look, she's saying mean things about me. Like, yeah, First Amendment, you know, and she's not crossing any boundaries established by law, to my knowledge. And he's trying to control the hearing, which I actually understand. So I have this terrible habit when I'm talking to, if I'm calling something in, because the police brain don't shut off. So I'll see something like that's a concern. I think that's an actual issue. I will call the police. I try to be the non-emergency line when I can if it's not an emergency. But I'll be giving them information. And sometimes the dispatcher, and let me tell you, I've some dispatchers, man, but that's a whole different conversation. They'll be like, sir, you need to answer the questions I'm asking, which is fair. The problem is I know what questions they're going to ask. I know what law enforcement needs, because I've been there, but they don't know that. So of course I'm gonna be like, sir, stop talking. Which incidentally, people are yelling at their screen right now. But it's just, I know which direction it needs to go, but sometimes I just need to sit back and let it come out. And at the end, if it isn't covered, I'll sort of be like, all right, and this as well. Thank you. And Chili was sort of the same way in court, where he kept being told by the judge, like, you stop. I'm watching the video that you provided me. Stop talking. If what you're saying is true, I will see it. But let me listen. You have to let me listen. You can't try to convince me that this evidence says something if it doesn't. And that's what he's trying to do. She's calling for people to call my cell phone. He says this about me as well. He says that I call for people to do that, which is absolutely false. Do not call his cell phone. People are mass calling my cell phone. Like, bro, you doxed yourself on your own stream. And that's, I don't know what you thought was going to happen. I don't agree with harassment through telephonic communications. In many places, that's legal. And I would never tell people to do that. And in fact, I tell people the exact opposite. But he thinks that myself and Kate have told people to do, which is false. And for him to take that to court and say, they're doing this thing, and then provide a video that has nothing to do with that, you got to provide the evidence. But he makes all these claims of things that he thinks people will agree with nothing to back it up. And it might work in his echo chamber where people just go, you said it, and therefore I love it. But in court, that's probably not going to fly. And it didn't fly because he lost that case. They had the hearing on the 10th. And my understanding is Kate absolutely, there was no danger to her at all when it comes to losing. I have not seen it. Maybe someday I will, if a copy surfaces. But yeah, oh boy, he's bad.
And when you described that, what was going through my mind was the infamous moment maybe you guys heard about this legal proceeding that was going on between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Maybe you heard about that, maybe not. I don't know. I don't think it got very much coverage in the news. But there was that now infamous moment where Amber Heard's attorney put someone on the stand, asked a question, and then before the guy could get more than 10 or 15 seconds into his response, the attorney objected to the commentary of his own witness. So there's all sorts of lunacy everywhere, even in professional circles. So it would not at all surprise me that Chili would do things worse than that.
Paul, you were saying something was happening?
Yeah, so I did listen to the audio of Chili's, it's called an ex parte hearing, and I will preface this by saying I'm not an attorney in Massachusetts, so there may be nuances to their law that I'm not taking into consideration here, but for the most part, the ex parte notion of what Chili was trying to do is not necessarily improper. An ex parte motion means that one of the parties is not present, and usually the grounds for that is that it's the time scale is so emergent that it necessitates having an immediate hearing without necessarily giving proper notice to all of the parties involved. And when I was doing estate and guardianship work in Minnesota, I filed ex parte motions before if there was a need for an emergency guardianship or conservatorship, indicating to the court, hey, this is such a pressing matter that we need a ruling on it immediately, and then we'll have a hearing as soon as is reasonably practical. We just need authority from the courts to protect a person whose life is in danger, or something like that. And so here, if Chili, viewing it as a legitimate concern, believes that he needs a harassment protection order, it's not necessarily improper for him to seek it in an ex parte fashion. But what happened in this, and you could call it a hearing, it's really more of just an informal meeting with the judge, is that he did present some evidence trying to convince the judge that a harassment protection order, however it's labeled in Massachusetts, was proper. And the judge really had three options. She could have either denied it all entirely, she could have given him the protection order, or the option that she picked was to set it for an actual hearing. So that means that the judge apparently was not convinced of it being so emergent in nature that it necessitated granting the order from the ex parte hearing, but it was still important enough to have a hearing with both parties present and properly noticed. So that went to the hearing on the 10th, and I don't actually know the date of the ex parte part of that, but yeah, the judge took a cursory look at the evidence that Chili was trying to present, and she had legitimate questions for it, and Chili was just getting more and more agitated that anybody would question the notion of the assertions he was trying to make.
Well, it's questions he
And
couldn't answer with that evidence because his evidence didn't show it.
Right, and he just became more and more offended, at one point even getting into a verbal altercation with the court officer, calling him a scumbag in front of the judge. I mean, as much as Chili likes to claim that he's going to go take the California bar, not only do I not think that he has the, I guess intellect isn't the right word. He's not prepared to take the exam, certainly. He doesn't have a legal education either, but he also just doesn't have the demeanor to be an attorney. I get ruled against in court all the time, and the proper response is, thank you, Your Honor, we'll file an objection or an appeal if we need to, and then you walk out the door. Whereas anytime Chili is adversely ruled against in court, that means the court is corrupt, the judge is a scumbag, the people have it out for him and just hate him because he's too alpha or something like that. He can't envision a world in which his assertions are not correct, and so anybody denying them or opposing them is just beyond consideration in his mind.
And Paul, you just made a comment that made me write something in big letters. It says alpha, but not. And that's something that I wanted to bring up. So this, I think, is hardly limited to Chili. Paul, there's a lot more that I want to unpack with what you just said, but this is something that was kind of left over from the last time. But in this way, Chili is hardly alone. You look at how often, and Kfar, I think you could probably speak to this maybe the best, but you look at how Chili behaves. Look at his boorish behavior. And I'm being kind when I use the term boorish and when I use the word behavior for that matter. He spends so much of his time proclaiming, I, alpha, hear me roar, when you look at someone who is a real alpha, they don't waste time telling you. They just do boss stuff and tell you to either get in line or, Kfar, as you would put it, stop doing dumb shit and get in line. I mean, what do you think?
I think it's more him covering up for his past, I guess. He had some unsavory things happen to him when he was in jail of some kind that he talked about. But it's honestly not a strange tactic compared to what other auditors try to do. Most auditors try to threaten you. They try to, nut up on you. But at the end of the day, the moment anybody touches you, that's when they just turn into little babies. You saw it when, at the parade when he ran into Kate, he freaked out. Kate was just like, you made me knock my phone out of my hand. What are you doing? And he wanted to cry to the police. And it's just a real alpha's not going to do that. A real alpha's also not going to threaten a female, even though Kate's much larger than him. We're not going to go into that. I don't know. When I first saw it, I didn't really think it was that strange, honestly, just because several other auditors go to, I'm alpha, violence first when I'm wrong, and then I'll deal with it after.
And Blue Bacon, I think it's safe to say, with your experience as a Leo and an MP and all the other things that you've done, you've probably seen situations like that where you'd go to correct someone or take them into custody, and the first thing they do is puff up and try to tell you, no, you're wrong. I mean, what's your experience been with stuff like that?
It honestly hasn't been that bad. And I like to think that's because my law enforcement activities happen on military installation. So yes, I did enforce law on civilians, but generally a civilian on a military installation is very sort of, my bad, I didn't know. Because I think that because military, it's much more intense, which is actually kind of the opposite. That's a whole conversation. Military police are generally pretty chill, honestly. And there's a lot of stuff we do and don't do that really isn't that bad. And I like to think that we're actually held more accountable than a lot of civilian police. There are a lot more eyes on us. We move around a lot more, so we don't have the time to build up, 20 years of work experience with another person. If we mess up, we're done. We get hit hard. And so you'll often find military police who are in a situation that they're unfamiliar with will be pretty chill and be like, look, I don't want it to happen, but we're going to let it slide because I don't have enough knowledge. I will, find me 30 minutes from now and it'll be different. But right now, I've never experienced it before. So I'm going to let you off with a warning. I'm going to sort of monitor what's going on. I'm going to call my sergeant who does know about this. I don't hate that mentality. I really don't. I think that's a very appropriate thing is, look, this isn't about me being right. The above that should be don't violate people's rights. Don't do the wrong thing. And there are limits and situational dependent, etc. But on a military installation, the civilians are usually pretty good. The soldiers are usually pretty good because the mentality of you obey orders is so ingrained that it's you encounter it. You do. You have some private in the infantry who is intoxicated. It's like, I'm too cool. MPs, I hate MPs. And then like 8 more MPs show up, and generally they put their shirt back on and. Not bad. But I've never had a situation that I couldn't get back down to a normal level. And I've very rarely has it been where they were like super intense and then drop back down. It does happen, but not really that often. And one of the beautiful things about working with soldiers as well is there's common ground. And so de-escalation is a skill that if you can't de-escalate as an MP, you're not trying hard enough. And as a civilian officer, I get it. There's a lot of variation in the people you interact with and the places and the calls that you get. The military, it's a much more sort of closed environment where you're not dealing with things that you generally haven't dealt with before. There aren't too many surprises. There's a lot. But nothing like, oh my God, like all this drug use, I don't know how they're going to behave. It's certainly limited. So it's great being able to be like, look, we don't even have to get to that part where you're getting really puffed up and real intense. And that's been my experience, although other MPs will tell you differently. And certainly you get enough alcohol in someone who is having some issues, it might go that way. At that point, you'll generally sort of call someone they know, like let's get their sergeant here, and their sergeant will show up and talk them down. It's a familiar face. They're going to be close by. So my experience in it, long ramble short, not too much, fortunately. And I'm not unhappy about that.
Nah, and that's understandable. I had a boss once who was a retired MP, and he regaled us with some stories of some things he saw. And a lot of it, Kfar, if you remember when we had you on one of these times, remember I said he's the Navy veteran who's seen it all and shaken his head sadly at most of it? That was this guy's posture. He'd seen some things that that made the challenges that he faced when he was working with us seem very minuscule. And that kind of shaped my perceptions about MP interactions. But I will say that to hear Blue Bacon's description, it does remind me of that infamous video of, I don't know if any of you guys have seen it, but there's a video of a herd of First Amendment frauditors trying to do their thing at one of the ACPs at Fort Bragg. And I can tell you that the gate guards at Bragg do not mess around. And
no, they don't.
No. And they were actually pretty cool with this or these individuals. I can't remember what the particulars were, but these guys did not get onto the base and they were shooed away from the gate. But the MPs, they did a boss job, but they kept level heads. Very impressive to me. But to go back to Paul for a minute, I've got like a list of things that I want to get back to. It's like, I want to talk about the stuff that I wanted to talk about, but I also want to go back to all this great stuff that people are saying. So it's a good problem to have. But to go back to Paul for a minute. So Paul, you were talking about Chile wanting to get a law license. And I don't know the entire process of getting legally licensed to do legal things. But I do know that one critical element of it is character and fitness. And you have to do, if my understanding is, you have to do character and fitness on a recurring basis. So from what Kfar and Blue Bacon have shared tonight, and from what maybe you know about Blue Bacon separately, or about chili separately, sorry, I misspoke. I remind you, this is decaf coffee, so I have problems Englishing sometimes. But from what you know about chili, talk to us about your predictions on what would happen if he did try to get through character and fitness. Do you think he would make it?
To give just kind of a broad scope for how it was for me, at least, when I applied for law school, I had to, submit all of the academic records for undergrad, and then also do, I think it was a background check, get character and fitness references. So 3 people who had to not be related to me in some way, shape, or form to recommend that I'm fit to go to law school in the first place. And then I think you also had to take the LSAT. So you have a degree of character and fitness assessment going into law school. Then during law school, you are on a continuing obligation to report any interactions with the law that you have. I even had to report that I got some parking tickets for trying to park in the neighborhood around the law school where parking was horrible. That's the only time I've ever gotten parking tickets, incidentally. But you're on a continuing obligation to report those things. Then, when you go to take the bar exam, you have to register and submit to another background check. You have to get... I don't think there were any character and fitness recommendations for that, but once you were actually going to get licensed after the bar exam, you had more character and fitness references that you needed. And so I don't deny that Chili could, I'm sure, find people who are not related to him who would be willing to recommend him to any of these organizations. But in doing background checks, and certainly the criminal interactions that Chili had from long ago would probably not prevent him from being accepted to practice law if he had all of the other qualifications, but his behavior in the last year and a half could certainly have an influence on that. Because in doing a background check, they would now see his outstanding warrant in Ohio, I'm sure, and they could just see all of his behavior on YouTube, and that would be, I believe, some pretty big strikes against him.
Yeah, and I look at his behavior just as he expresses it on YouTube, and even if we accept that he's putting on a performance for the YouTube audience, which you always got to have that in the back of your mind, these people could very well be trying to build a character to present to people out on the interwebs. But even if we accept that, I would almost say, especially if we take Chili on that level, that would pretty much torpedo any chance he would have of getting certifications, law licenses, anything like that. Because let's be real, he looks unstable. He looks not just unstable, he looks insane. So, yeah. And
here's one other thing that I will say. When it comes to things that could prevent you from being allowed to practice law in whatever jurisdiction you are seeking approval for, having charges for things like drug violations does not necessarily preclude you from being able to practice. When I was in law school, they put a big deal of emphasis on maintaining mental health for attorneys, because it can be a really stressful job, certainly if you're dealing with divorce cases where it's just really animus behavior between the parties that takes a toll on the attorney. When you're reading criminal, very aggressive child abuse cases, that takes a toll mentally. So they want to make sure that there are a lot of resources available for attorneys. And if I have a childhood friend who experienced some drug problems around what would be our college years, and since then he's gone through rehab, he's recovered, and now he's going to law school, and I'm incredibly proud of him for that. But the one thing that will assuredly preclude you from ever being a lawyer again is anything dealing with fraud or financial issues. If you steal money from somebody, if you take money from somebody who trusted you with it for whatever reason, almost a complete guarantee you will never practice law in any state. That's where they view it incredibly, incredibly seriously.
As far as I know, Chili's never taken money from people wrongly, maybe in exchange for a product that failed to live up to expectations. As far as I know, he's never done that.
And when it comes to being licensed to practice law, that is, to my knowledge, in all 50 states done by the highest court of that state. So in Minnesota, I had to get licensed from the Supreme Court of Minnesota. When I transferred to Ohio, I had to petition the Supreme Court of Ohio to accept all of my credentials and license me there. They can withhold permission, they can suspend your license, they can exercise complete control over your license in that regard based on your behavior. So if there are complaints about you doing things illicitly with money that you were entrusted with, you can bet the disciplinary committee subset of whatever Supreme Court you're in will look at that under a microscope, because there are few things as egregious that an attorney can do as misusing client money.
Can we just pause for a minute to contemplate a world where someone like Chili could be a licensed, practicing attorney with actual influence on court proceedings instead of being regarded as a buffoon the way he is now? Can we just think about that for a minute?
Well, that was one of the most alarming things about the Power of Attorney video. You know, the first thing that I think I ever saw of Chili was with his quote-unquote debate with Team Skeptic. And then shortly after that, he was in Ohio and went with, her name is Sarah Page, to the clerk's office to draft this power of attorney because Chili erroneously believed that would allow him to represent her in court as an attorney in fact, which is not how that works. But I just remember thinking to myself very alarmedly, my God, if this was actually a legitimate power of attorney, which I'm convinced it isn't, this woman is entrusting him with the ability to sell her house if he wanted to. He could go to her bank and withdraw all of the cash from her accounts. He could do any number of serious financial transactions on her behalf without her permission. Because I was an estate planning attorney in Minnesota. I drafted numerous powers of attorneys for clients, and every single time I instructed my clients on how serious of a matter that was, how important it was to trust the person you're giving this authority to, and what the potential ramifications are. I can't stress enough how serious that is, and how alarmed I was.
I think all of us were probably alarmed by that, especially once we saw the video that I think was related to that, or it may have been the same one, where he was screaming at the guy, that innocent guy with the vacuum, saying, "You're interfering with transparency." Kfar, you've been awfully quiet. What do you have to say about all this?
Yeah, Kfar.
Oh, you know.
Pull your weight.
I've got a lot to say. I've probably covered Chili less than everyone. I'm blocked on his channel, which is weird for me being this big in the community. He's a giant child. You guys were talking about what it would be like if he was an attorney. Anytime it would go the wrong way for him, he would threaten to hold the judge down. And I can't take Chili serious in almost anything he does. He's like that sketchy guy that you grew up with that was always just like, oh, trust me, and then never did the right thing. Like, that's Chili in a nutshell for me.
I've made numerous comments to Chili's supporters that the ability to beat somebody up physically has no bearing on the incorrectness of a person's legal arguments.
That's
right.
That's like how you know you lost a debate, when you have to resort to, oh, but I'll beat you up. It's just like, all right.
And when you look at Chili, I know we all are probably thinking it, but you look at Chili, and that's like his go-to response to things, that and I'm an alpha. But I put it to you, when you think about how to resolve an issue in polite society, threatening to beat someone up or hold someone down, we don't kink shame on this channel, but that's weird even for us. when you do stuff like that, it's so far outside the norm. I think people had it right, honestly, when they said that this is a result of the roids that he's on. I mean, without knowing for sure whether he does or he doesn't, increased aggression is certainly one symptom of use of the roids. So, I look at that as a proximate cause. And I do kind of think that there was a story that I heard not that long ago about a Marine with almost no rank going into a hospital with his wife or girlfriend or something like that. And when people didn't drop everything to take care of his issue, he puffed up and was screaming at people and saying, "I'm going to have your rank," and yada, yada, yada. One of the nurses, I think, figured out who he was and who his command was. And not long after that, it emerged that he felt slighted because someone insulted his rank. He's an E4, so he had no rank. But the next time he was seen, he was an E2 or an E1, one of the two. But, I look at what Chile does and I regard it with the same kind of, I'm going to be kind and say pity. It's not the word I want to use, but it's the word that I'm going to use. So, insult, in that case, the analysis was that the Marine was exploding the way that he was because his rank had been insulted. It's like, dude, what rank? You're nothing. And
you do encounter that where people are like, "Oh, I'm not a private. I'm a private first class." Like, cool, private, sit back down. Some people, not most of them, but occasionally it's just like, stop.
Yes.
No.
Stop, child. Kfar, tell me.
It's ironic that... Oh, sorry.
No, it's all right. What you got, Paul?
I was going to say what's ironic is it seems like that's an issue with people's perceived ability to command respect from people they don't know, but in acting that way, they are essentially guaranteeing that they are not earning the respect from the people they expect it from. And Chile kind of functions the same way, where he keeps saying, "Oh, people take one look at me and they're just afraid of me." And it's like, well, I wouldn't characterize that as fear necessarily, but a normal person would be off-put by a belligerent, angry person being overly hostile and aggressive at the slightest issue. And it functions the same way with police. I certainly have no law enforcement experience myself, but if you approach a police officer in a calm, normal fashion, you can have a reasonable conversation with them. But if you approach them out of the gate, hostile and overly aggressive given the situation, they're going to respond in kind, and the situation is going to automatically be escalated a degree or two, regardless of how the people want to try to de-escalate the situation.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I was getting ready to ask Kfar about. If Blue Bacon and I have very obviously seen a lot of stuff like that in our various travels. I was kind of curious if you had seen that in your time with the Navy.
So I came in as an E3, left as an E4 because I care not for rank. Responsibility just breeds more problems, so I'm just like, I'll get to E4. I was in charge of people, but you would have E1s and E2 that came out of boot camp that thought they were just the hottest shit. And it's just like, or when we were out on deployment, we had cadets from the Naval Academy come out and they wanted to be saluted by everyone. And I don't know if I shared a meme on here. I think I saw it on Facebook. It was the old man, Captain America, and he's like, "I don't think I will." And that's how I lived my life. I'm just like, you have done 3 seconds in the military, calm down.
Yeah, and the point of going off on that little tangent was simply, you get someone who feels accomplished in a certain way and it goes straight to their ego, and that seems to be exactly what happens with Chile. Like, he gets people to buy his indestructible trifold, or he gets people to subscribe to him, or people who see him coming and they get this feeling of revulsion and they walk away, and he interprets it as fear, and it goes to his ego. And in college, one of my comm professors explained it this way: you get pretty people who get accustomed to hearing that they're pretty. So when they don't hear it, they assume that there's naturally something wrong with the person who doesn't say it, whereas they're expecting something that they haven't really earned and that they're not really entitled to. And I kind of get the same vibe off Chili as that story gave me back in the day. So I don't really know if I had a point to saying that.
Blue Bacon wants to, if he wants to address pretty people. I don't know. That's your crowd.
Yeah.
What? My neighbor's mowing the lawn. I didn't hear what was said.
We were basically talking.
Never mind. Disregard.
We were talking about how good looking Blue Bacon is, and how glad we are that he
Filters.
has a high definition camera.
It's all camera filters. There's an app you can use, and you can run it through. I'm using an AverMedia device, and it just takes that, and I look like a troll in real life.
Gonna need you to slip me.
Saying you're catfishing your viewers.
Yeah, let me get you the name of the software.
Yeah, we decided, I don't know if you guys saw my stream last night, but we decided I have a sloping, bulbous forehead. So, yeah, anything we can do to take the edge off of this would greatly appreciate. So, you just reminded me, too, of what? K-Far's laughing.
Nothing. We were talking about beautiful people, and I'm just like, oh, Lord, what is next?
It's funny, because I was going to address you, K-Far, and be like, K-Far, tell us what it's like. But then you beat me to it.
Well, K-Far has always been, so darn good looking on his streams. I said it way back when. I'm Brandon Bridges, and I support the staring at of K-Far on this stream. So there you go.
Sustained.
Oh, me. For anyone who's watching at home, if you've seen any of my live streams of late, they can go anywhere. So, just so you know, watch my streams. You never know what you're going to see or hear. And with that said, K-Far actually said that if 10 people go and subscribe to his channel and tell him that B Squared sent him, he would actually do a series of sea chanties at the beginning of his next live stream. So go like and subscribe to K-Far and tell him B Squared sent you so we can finally get our live performance of serenading.
Be careful with that. I think Artie's made some promises to his viewers about sea shanties, and he has begrudgingly had to follow through with some of those.
Yeah, I was about to say, I know I drink the apple juice heavily on occasions, but I do not remember making that promise.
Or maybe someone made that promise on your behalf. Who can say what happened? Who can say what really happened? There's story one and there's story two, and reality is somewhere in the middle. So, but not to get back on topic. So this is something that I really, really, really wanted us to dive into the last time that we didn't really have time for, but that I know all three of you will have some valuable insights on. So we've talked about in the frauditor community especially, they push so hard for transparency for everybody else, but the second you ask them a single question, one of two things happens. Either they'll say, I don't answer questions, or they'll just launch in this profane, vulgar tirade. And I'm thinking about frickin' media when I say that. The guy who just had his channel demonetized and was finally saying, well, maybe I need to just give this up and apply for disability because I hurt myself while I was out frauditing. So, but talk a little about that disconnect and that hypocrisy.
Well, I will acknowledge that there's a degree of legitimacy to how their inquiries can be one-sided. Like, in police interactions, there is no obligation to give them information typically it's if you're suspected of committing a crime, but I'm sure courts wouldn't have an issue applying that to even the auditors who try and film the police declining to answer questions. But again, that just goes back to my point about police being people too, and if you approach them in an openly hostile fashion, the human reaction is going to be the same for most people. It's going to be, you're caught off guard, you don't necessarily anticipate people to behave in this belligerent fashion, and I guess from police training, they could very well be instructed to anticipate that nowadays. But for most conversations, you're going to get out of a conversation what you put into it for it to be a proper two-sided conversation. But they love the perceived power dichotomy between themselves and the quote-unquote public servants, who they expect to provide them the red carpet and fanning them with palm fronds. And that's just not how most people act in society.
And I'd like to follow that by pointing out, so I think I may have shared this in a previous video or live stream, but not that long ago, the police were at the place where I live for completely unconnected business, but I had a question that I wanted to ask them. So I waited until the action seemed to die down, and I stood back for a little bit just to make sure all was well. And I saw them looking at me, so they knew I was there. But when it looked like there was an opportune moment to talk to them when it wouldn't be interfering, I walked up to them, and what they did was, one officer had their back to me, and when his partner said, "Hey, heads up," they fanned out into a semicircle, which tactically is a wise thing. So they were forming a semicircle around me, which is what they should have done. But he asked the officer that had waved his partner away, looked at me and said, "What can we help you with?" And I said, "I had a question. It's not related to why it looks like you guys are here, but if you wouldn't mind talking to me for a minute, I'd like to get your expertise on something." And we had a great conversation. I mean, one of the officers that was there was cracking jokes. I mean, they gave me the information that I needed, certainly, but then we had a conversation as people. And it's amazing how easy it is, not to get tased, get taken to the ground, or get torture cuffs put on when you talk to people with respect. And I could tell when I was talking to them, they were not expecting a citizen to be looking for their input on something. And I mean, I could tell when I said, "You guys have been great. I really appreciate it. Y'all enjoy the rest of your day and be safe." I could tell by the looks on their faces. That was about the last thing they expected. So what you got, Blue Bacon?
So when they were in Seattle, when the Chop Chaz riot situation was happening, I was there, and I inserted myself into that situation to document some of it, to see if the rumors that I was hearing was true. And many of them were not. Some of them were, depending on the day, depending on the people who were there. It could be very chaotic. I tried to be safe with it, got attacked by some people. Neither here nor there. I learned from it. But at one point, I went up to, there was a van of police officers that were just waiting to, swap out for the shift, I imagine. And I said, "Hey, gentlemen." And they immediately just like, "Yeah, what's up? What's going on? How can I help you?" I went, "No, it's nothing. I get that there's so much negativity towards you right now, just for being you, just for doing this job, not for anything that you've actually done. And I just want to say that although, it may not be what you're hearing constantly, there are plenty of people who really do appreciate what you do, and I appreciate what you do, and thank you for being here. And I know it's really rough to experience this every single day right now, where you have to be in an environment where people just hate your guts, but that's not everyone. And I just thank you though. And I swear, one of them looked like he was gonna cry. Just like, what? Oh no, thank you. Like, they needed to hear it. We forget that police are people. We forget, and police sometimes forget that people are people. You work in homicides 20 years. Your brain switches things to numbers to protect you mentally. Cool. Understand. But both sides need to remember that the people they're interacting with are human beings. And it did mean a lot to them just to get that message, which I'm sure they already knew, but to hear it from someone who was not a part of their direct group. And I have my biases, sure. But yeah, you treat them like people. And we slung some jokes around. We chatted for 5 minutes, and I was like, "All right, I'll get out of your hair because you guys know each other, and you will probably want to have your conversations. I should get out of here before someone OCs me in the face again." But yeah, no, it's a fair point that was brought up.
I lived a few blocks away from where George Floyd was murdered when that happened.
Mm.
And so I, in Minneapolis, was right in the thick of the riots and all of that stuff that was going on in the days following. And I lived in a condo building that shared a parking lot with a small strip mall, and the majority of that strip mall portion burned to the ground. So when that fire started, of course, my wife and I call the 911 dispatch operator, and we can just hear it in her voice of how panicked and overwhelmed they were, because we would see rioters come out and start throwing rocks into storefronts and looting, and then a single cop car would drive up, try and disperse the mob. None of the police would actually get out because they couldn't safely, I'm sure. And then the cop car would drive on to the next instance where they were called to, and the rioters and looters would come back out. But it was a ridiculous time. And I never actually interviewed any police officers myself, but there were press meetings and briefings with officers who I could tell were really upset about what had happened, and they didn't agree with, or they certainly weren't supporting Derek Chauvin, and thought that it was right that he be charged criminally.
Yeah, those were some times, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Kfar, what you got?
Oh, I was going to piggyback off Blue Bacon a little bit earlier when it came to how you approach police. Blue Bacon obviously does what he does, so he's a little bit more pro law enforcement than auditors. But
just a bit.
Shocker, I know. But then you have people in the auditing community. I point out the Ironton auditor. He does it, from what I see, is the right way. He stands back. He records it. If the police come up with him, at this point, I am assuming he doesn't go to, the police cookout or anything, but they come up, they joke around, they talk like normal people. The officers aren't like, yo, back up, get your hands out of your pocket, stuff like that. But then you have auditors like MCC, freaking media, and he who shall not be named. When an officer rolls up on a scene because a civilian calls you or calls the police because he's being harassed by 3 random people with a camera, the officers are automatically going to roll up feeling some type of way about the situation. And, freaking media, I know, as an example, he automatically comes at officers at a 10 upon meeting them. There's no warming up period like, oh, you're a dick, so I'm going to be a dick back. It's no. He comes at them at a 10, and then it's like, well, why are you guys treating me badly? Like, why do you think? But yeah, it's how you approach it. If you're on the pro law enforcement side or the auditing side, I know there's probably a couple auditors. I can't think of any off the top of my head by name. But I've seen videos where they'll stand back, they'll record. All is well. The police don't come at them any type of way because they're not coming at the police any type of way. That is all.
And that brings us back to kind of the main theme, which is we accept a set of common standards, and I'll take it a step further and say a certain degree of common decency towards how we interact with people. And exactly as Kfar just described, that is missing from the way a lot of these auditors behave. And part of that is the hypocrisy that I was describing. They push so hard for transparency for everybody else, but they will fight tooth and nail to keep anyone from finding anything out about them. And I've referenced that Blue Bloods episode before, but we've talked about the real world corollary to that a lot of these people do have problems in their criminal history. It's not just arrest records, but criminal histories as well. And like, well, you can't get a job anywhere else, so this is what you do. And it's like, it's out there, and instead of addressing it and making it better, you're just doubling down on the things that led you down the bad road to start with. At least that's what I think. I mean, what do you guys have to say? Paul, if you're a prosecutor, you've done you've done your time, I would say, in the criminal justice system. So you see a lot of this from a perspective that the rest of us probably don't get. So what do you think about that?
Well, primarily the cases that I'm trying currently are actually civil child support cases. And so at most, what people who don't pay their child support risk are minor jail sentences. And for the most part, I actually try and work with the public defenders to keep the people out of jail so they can continue their jobs and make child support payments. So it's disingenuous to say that for all prosecutors, their sole goal is to get you as much time in prison as humanly possible. Well, no. They want justice to be served, and they also want progress to be made in a case. If that's involving violent crimes, then certainly there's going to be jail sentences attached to that, because that's how we expect the system to function. But each case is different. It's not fair to lay blanket statements over prosecutors, over defense attorneys, over police, over judges. The generalization is just not fair.
And since you referenced child support cases, it bears mentioning that it seems like, at least from my chair, that a lot of frauditors seem to have child support issues in one form or another. Look at freaking media. Look at Broken System, Broken Trust. Look at the original Bobby Hill Princess Patty Cakes. I mean, look at all of these people that have. One of them said something a while back like, "I got to see my kid today," I look at that and I think, for most people, that's not a landmark event that is newsworthy. It's just a thing that we do because we can do it when we want to. But for a lot of these people, it seems to be something that has to happen with court approval, or that they're in arrears with child support. I mean,
no, I think a lot of that comes from everyone thinks that they're normal. Everyone says, I am a normal person. Well, most people think this, but generally that's the thought. I'm a normal person. I'm the baseline, and therefore the way I am is correct. And so you get people that aren't great people potentially and say, well, I was raised this way and it worked out for me. Look at me. I'm normal. So I should be able to do that to my parents. And then the government says, or my kids, sorry. Government says, no, you can't do that with your kids. And now all of a sudden your kids are taken away, but you don't think you're wrong because what you're doing is normal. So what's the government doing? And I think this mentality we see a lot. And it's just like, you got to understand there is a baseline, but that doesn't mean you're on it.
And not to use ignorant as a pejorative term, but just its pure definition of lack of knowledge. Sometimes people are ignorant of the standards that the rest of society abides by, and they don't, whether it was through parental neglect when they were children, whether it could be any number of circumstances, they just don't comprehend that they're behaving in a way that they shouldn't. And so sometimes it is not an intentional abusive situation, but Child Protective Services can still get involved. It's a really difficult situation when that has to happen. And in the office I work in, we know that the cases we see are already going to be bad ones if we had to get involved at all.
Yeah. Yeah, for real. So I think one thing we can all agree on is that there are some fairly serious personal / emotional underpinnings to why these people do what they do. And the extreme cases like Glenn Serio or Chauncey Dragonfire and some of these others that are just like so far out there that I don't know what to say about them. The point being, there is a pretty serious disconnect between what we see as acceptable and normal and what they see as acceptable and normal. That's what I think we've come about to tonight. What do you guys have to say?
Yeah,
sounds about right.
Well, For Glenn Serio specifically, I guess,
boy.
I would argue that there are some who, I don't know if there's a term for this already, but I would call it the spectacle effect, where they understand that at least some of their behavior is grossly outside of the norm, and they're doing it to gain more clout, more views on YouTube, whatever that may be. They have that vested interest, like you said at the beginning, in causing more of a stir than would normally be called for.
In the broadcasting world, we call those limelight chasers. And kind of like how in the legal world you have ambulance chasers. Those are, and it goes back to something I described at the very beginning, that people are kind of creating a character for the public eye in order to get attention, or KFAR, as we would say in the present day, people who chase clout. And I thought that, to be honest, I thought that about our 400-pound friend, Mr. Serio, at first, but the more I look at his stuff, the more I became convinced he was just emotionally unbalanced in probably some other ways. And I really and truly think that in his case, what we're seeing is Glenn Serio unfiltered. That's what I think anyway.
And there is a difference between
agree.
not understanding that your behavior is wrong and just being okay with committing wrongful behavior for the sake of reaching our goals. And I'm convinced that Glenn Serio is in the latter. He, regardless of any emotional disturbances that he may have experienced, regardless of his mental health, I'm convinced that he understands that a large portion of his behavior is, like I said, grotesquely outside the norm that we should expect from most people. I mean, the incident with the black, I don't know if it was a police officer or a security guard, was appalling. There's no justification for that.
Yeah, and certainly, as we described before, there's certainly a degree of clout chasing to that, because realistically, thankfully, that's not something you see every day, and that's not something I think I've ever seen anybody else do. So in that regard, let's be thankful Glenn's the only one. But I mean, to the extent that he's clout chasing and chasing after YouTube money, I would call what he does an absolutely insane way to do it. But again, that's just me. That is just me.
And to touch on your ambulance chasing point, that's a, I would say, funny and to some degree warranted description of some lawyers, but ironically, there are limitations on what lawyers can do to solicit clients. That's part of, at least in most states, the rules of professional responsibility. And in Chili's situation, he is not a licensed attorney, but even if he was, the way in which he's trying to solicit these lawsuits that he's participating in to some degree or another would almost assuredly violate those rules of professional responsibility for seeking out clients. So in all of his talk about taking the California bar exam, even if he did become a licensed attorney to help people, he would be experiencing some professional responsibility ramifications for the way that he conducts himself as he does now.
You mean there are limits to what lawyers can do to get clients? Maybe that means, as you say that, I'm thinking about the last time I got a speeding ticket many years ago, far longer now than it seems, and I got a stack of letters about this thick in my mailbox from lawyers saying, "We'll take your case." And I'm like, You people from 5 and 6 states away don't need to be sending me mail. There are people in my own zip code that can handle this.
Yep.
So that's something I'd like to see limited, but that's a topic for another day. So if we start with the assumption that there are personality traits and other quirks behind this behavior, we have to talk about how people and institutions respond to it. So increasingly, we're seeing cities, counties, states, and different entities at different levels beginning to pass legislation to address the problems that are being created by First Amendment auditors specifically. And I find it ironic that the gross excesses that we've been talking about that these people commit are leading to the very thing that they purport to fear, which is a limitation of certain rights in certain places. And the last one that I remember seeing, and Blue Bacon and KFAR, you guys are much better informed than I am, so maybe you know better than this, but the last one that I remember seeing was an initiative in Florida that stiffened penalties for people interfering with police. I can't remember the specifics of it. I don't think that legislation passed the state legislature, but it is the most recent effort of which I'm aware. What are you guys tracking, if anything?
Nothing new. Nothing recent, unfortunately.
I think the last thing I heard of was the House bill. It didn't even really limit auditing. It just set how far police could kind of push you back if you were recording a traffic stop or something, something within reason. It wasn't, you can't do it. I think it's 15 or 30 feet or something, which if you have more than an iPhone 1, which I'm convinced all auditors use to audit, if you have something better than that, you have a zoom. Contrary to popular auditor belief, you can zoom in. You'll still hear anything that happens. But that was I believe there was also something in Arizona that auditors are up in arms, but I'm almost positive it's something similar to what happened in Florida. But they're oh, they're trying to outlaw auditing, and they're no, they're just trying to put a safe distance on how close you can be to a serious incident. I know what happened in the UK. A couple videos ago, an auditor was a car length away from a situation where a dude was actively trying to fight two female officers, and every officer within a block came real quick, but he was just making the situation worse because the guy was already enraged that he was having, I guess earlier in the video it didn't show it, but he was doing something wild. The two officers followed him, caught up with him, but the guy was yelling at the guy with the camera, and it's just one of the officers, "Hey bro, just back up a little bit," and he's "No, I'm fine right where I'm at," and it's well, clearly you're not. But yeah, it's,
I don't necessarily think that we're going to see more legislation explicitly prohibiting some of the behaviors that auditors have exhibited, but we are going to see legislation trying to specify vaguer areas of existing laws. I'm sure most states have a law that says something to the effect of officers can exert control over a traffic stop or an investigation incident. Well, the question there becomes, what does the word control mean? And to the police, that would probably mean anything that they think could reasonably allow somebody to interfere with their investigation, whereas the auditors are, of course, going to say, oh, if I'm only 5 feet away or 10 feet away from the incident, I'm not interfering. But then the officer is made less secure, thinking that this person could physically interfere with their investigation the closer they are, and that's a legitimate concern from their perspective. So I think, like KFAR mentioned, you're going to see more legislation with specifics about the distance people have to be from an active police investigation and things like that.
And on the subject of distance and controlling environments, I've seen a few articles from my local media, including print media, if you can believe that. Print media is apparently still a thing. But yeah, I was surprised to learn that. But I've seen a few articles of late that describe incidents where people would get into police parking lots and incite arson, or police would respond tactically, shall we say, to people who exhibit what could be signs of mental illness. And when I read things like that, I think about all the videos that we've seen of frauditors sneaking into police parking lots, say, or in the case of people displaying mental illness, got to talk about Floyd Wallace Jr., News Now Omaha. Like, the way that some of these things unfold, like, police have a right to be cautious about certain things. I mean, if they see someone prowling around their parking lot, arson is a potential thing. So they have a legitimate interest, I would say, in keeping secure areas secure. Hence all the no trespassing signs that frauditors pretend they don't see. Or, the way they respond to Floyd Wallace most of the time. He is exhibiting behaviors that could be, I think, charitably described as behaviors of a suspicious person. Blue Bacon, you may be able to talk about that a little more, but when they respond to him in a cautious manner and seek to control him, quote unquote, I think they're absolutely justified in doing it. And like Paul said, if there is a legislative attempt to maybe tighten up some definitions to give police more latitude, whatever the auditors think of it, I think that's a good thing.
And the terminology that you used there was really appropriate, legitimate interest, because oftentimes when there is a question of somebody exercising their rights as opposed to government intervention in the exercise of those rights, the legitimate state interest is one of the factors that's observed there. So in allowing people to record scenes where police are conducting an investigation or exercising control over the scene, they have a legitimate interest in protecting the safety of the officers by allowing them to exert more control than I'm sure the auditors would think is necessary. But the police don't know how any individual person, especially someone they don't know if you're coming from a larger community, is going to react. And with Ironton Auditor, Ironton is a small town. The officers know who Terry is now. They are, I'm sure, reasonably certain that he's not going to present any physical danger, so they feel more comfortable allowing him there. But when you have auditors that travel from city to city and encounter police who they've never met before, the officers don't know who this person is. They have, I would say, a very valid, heightened sense of caution when it comes to these people who try and insert themselves into investigations like that.
One staple, as you say that, I'm reminded of all the videos that I've seen, including a couple on your channel, KFAR, that featured frauditors basically trespassing in places where they shouldn't be. And when they're confronted by, like at a courthouse, say, when they're confronted by security, their answer will be something like, well, I would really rather not engage with you. I just want to go about my business. Basically, I just want to go and do what I want, and I don't really respect authority or the idea that there are limitations on what I'm doing.
Yeah, so when it comes to, I know I've done a couple videos where auditors have gone into parking lots and then were like shocked when police showed up to be like, hey, bud, what you doing? Where I worked, the courthouse and the police station shared a gated parking lot where you had to have a code to get in. The doors would automatically, or the gate would automatically open when you left, and then you would sit there, make sure it was closed, make sure nobody would, try to run the gate, and then you'd leave. I know in a video where News Now, Forever Sleep by Cop, he was crawling underneath police cars. Sorry to jump back to that stuff, but that's like an odd thing that like a normal person's not going to go, it's Tuesday night, I'm going to dress in all black and start crawling underneath police cars. It's not like a normal thing that you do on the weekends, but he decided to do that. But yeah, when it comes to courthouses like that, you'll see that all the time. I think it was a video, it was Metro Detroit Audit, freaking media, and then some random. They went to the courthouse, saw the sign that said they couldn't record, and tried to just like walk past it and walk through security without getting checked or anything. And then they were shocked when the, I don't know if they were deputies of some kind or court officers were like, hey, bud, you got to go through the metal detector. And they were like, no, we're good. And it's like, that's not how it works.
So in the court that I practice in, there are, because dealing with civil child support issues, sometimes parents will file their own motions. And so it's their case to prosecute, essentially. But what will happen is that every once in a while, one of them will not show up to court and will try and figure out why they're not appearing for the motion that they filed. Well, if they're a sovereign citizen, it turns out they didn't go through court security because they view that as a violation of their Fourth Amendment rights, and therefore they didn't get into the court building, so their case gets dismissed.
The irony is irresistible.
That sounds like
Yes.
sounds like he who shall not be named when he went to a certain courthouse around where I live and started yelling at them from across the courthouse that it was a violation of his Fourth Amendment.
Also, that's not the one where he was live streaming from right outside the courthouse, and they eventually were like, "Are you going to come into court, or do we have to issue a warrant for you?" Is that video? Or?
Yeah.
Oh no, that was Blue Bacon. That was yours. I'm
no,
sorry.
That's a different video. Blue Bacon's muted.
I am. That was a bunch of us did that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So So even though you were muted, I'm guessing you heard Kafar's description of what News Now Forever Sleep was doing on that Saturday night.
Yes.
Tell us from your perspective as a Leo, does that meet the definition of a suspicious person and or suspicious activities?
I would have, certainly, there would be reasonable suspicion to believe that crime is afoot. First of all, a person being in a place that you wouldn't expect a person to be, doing things you wouldn't expect a person to do. Crawling onto cars, I might assume they might be taking items from the vehicles. They might be adding items to the vehicles. Maybe trackers, maybe explosives. It could be, I mean, the range of things you could articulate for as to why you need to initiate some sort of contact is quite a lot. And I might even be able to hold them there until I got another officer to go and check under the vehicle and see if there's anything wrong. Because there is no legitimate reason to be under those vehicles, in my mind, if you're in our parking lot. Absolutely not. So if you're in a even if you're in a dark parking lot and you're just touching a car, that's enough to stop you and say, why are you touching it? Is it so that you can try to gain entry? What's going on? I get to ask you some questions. You don't have to answer them. But in the case of crawling under cars, I do get to hold you there until another officer arrives to check to see if you were doing anything. If we can't find anything within a reasonable amount of time, I'm going to let you go. Potentially, unless there's other ordinances or there are signs that you pass that say, do not go in here. And if not, I'm going to say, hey, do not come back again. You are now trespassed. Stop it. Depending on what I'm allowed to trespass from and where this is, etc. It can get complicated. But yeah, no, that's super suspicious stuff.
Yeah, my first thought would be catalytic converter theft if somebody's crawling under cars.
So, Paul, is that a big thing where you're at?
It was a huge thing right about the time I was moving from Minnesota to Ohio in my neighborhood. I had signed up for Nextdoor or whatever the local notification system was, and it was like every other notification was, oh, my catalytic converter got stolen from underneath my car.
Where I worked, we had a gigantic ring that would slide underneath cars, cut the pipes, take the whole thing, and then sell them like the city over.
We were starting to see advertisements for services where they would install a shield where the catalytic converter is. So they basically just like put like a hardened piece of steel or plastic under your car to protect that one component from being stolen.
Yeah. I think the people we ended up getting had like stolen 50 plus, just the two guys in like a 2-week span.
I remember seeing a local story about auto parts shop that got caught with like 50 catalytic converters, and their explanation was basically just like, I don't know how those got there.
And Steve Leto did something on catalytic converter theft not that long ago, and it seems like the thrust of his story was there are new laws on the books that stiffen penalties not just for catalytic converter theft, but for those found to be in possession.
Possession.
Yeah, it's more than just possession of stolen property. It's something specific to that. I'll have to find that video, and I'll put a link in the description for that. But it's a good video, and it's right now catalytic converter theft. You're absolutely right. KFAR is a thing. So I'm glad you asked that. So the big question of the night goes to Paul, and that is, from the standpoint of prosecution, what do you see happening in the future in response to what I think we could safely say is the escalation and worsening of frauditing as a thing?
Well, Kapar and I have discussed this briefly. We're pretty convinced that the pandemic has relaxed a lot of the consequences that get imposed for this sort of agitative behavior, the people who get arrested for minor incidents of disorderly conduct because they got into a disagreement with the police, or the people who, like Chile, just decide on a whim that they're going to stand their ground in a government building and claim that they're protesting after hours and get arrested for trespassing. We're going to see the courts, as they open back up again to normal their normal capacity, and especially with jails, you're going to see longer sentences imposed, and especially with the same actors accruing multiple sentences. Like Chile, if he were convicted in his Ironton cases, I would honestly be surprised if he actually got sentenced to jail time. I'm sure they would suspend a sentence, impose a fine, and just tell him, don't do this again. But then if he continues to do that behavior, that's where the consequences start to compound and escalate. And as you have these auditors who have made names for themselves engage in that behavior over and over again and get charged repeatedly, the consequences are going to get more and more severe. And that doesn't even have to involve any increase from a legislative perspective of the consequences.
And if memory serves, you said that you're working on a form of training for those in your profession to deal with this and address it. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So much like doctors have continuing medical education requirements to stay up to date on medical procedures, lawyers have continuing legal education credits that they have to get. And one of the things that I'm working on is a presentation mostly geared towards prosecutors or legal court staff and judges about how typical interactions with sovereign citizens and auditors tend to go in court, and what can be done to maintain essentially the court economy in terms of time. Because when you have auditors and sovereign citizens who like to follow the Mark Stevens script of questioning whether jurisdiction exists for their case or not, they try and hinder the progress from an arraignment at every possible instance they can. And that just creates more of a burden on the court's time and the judge's time. So if there are ways where we can hone strategies to make sure that their rights are being protected, because they do have to be advised of their rights, they do have to have the option to get an attorney if they want one, even though they very rarely do. They have to have their due process rights kept intact, but the procedure still needs to move forward. So in maintaining the balance between guarding the rights of the defendant and also proceeding with the trial as need be, that is a balancing act.
And boy, could they have used that the other day with that hearing where I swear it could have been a drinking game, and if you had taken a shot every time you heard these words, you would probably be dead by now. But objection, point of clarification.
Oh, the Juan Galt video?
Yeah.
That is not a proper objection, by the way.
Oh, nothing that the defendant in that case was doing is proper, I would say. But I said it then on that stream, and I've said it many times before and since. Judges should shut these people down when it becomes obvious that they're doing everything they can just to frustrate the process, and it really and truly looks to me sometimes like they're just trying to annoy the person in your role, Paul, the prosecutor, into just saying, okay, I've had enough of this, case dismissed. It really feels like that's what they're going for half the time. And I really and truly think that the judges that have the patience to listen to that for any length of time are superhuman.
And when you have a case where there's a prosecutor and a defense attorney who both know the proper procedure, they speak when they're asked to speak by the judge to get both sides of the case on the record, and hearings last sometimes as little as 5 minutes. But when you have pro se litigants who seem to think that they know more than the defense attorneys do, that's what really results in hearings taking longer and longer. And that's not to say that it isn't proper for a judge to take the time to advise a defendant properly of their rights. Certainly that has to happen in every case, but when you have people who develop these disingenuous theories of argument, that just exacerbates the process. It makes the judge more irritated because they're explaining things in terms that most, even lay people, would understand, but because the sovereign citizen or auditor is approaching it from a disingenuous standpoint, they're never going to accept the judge's explanation of what the circumstances of jurisdiction or their rights are. And so progress isn't going to be made until the judge forces it to.
Every time I hear the phrase pro se litigant, the name that pops into mind is Jonathan Lee Riches. Have you ever heard that name?
I can't say that I have.
Blue Bacon, KFAR, does that name ring a bell for either of you guys?
No.
This is a guy that was in prison for mail fraud or wire fraud or something like that, and he filed pro se actions in jurisdiction after jurisdiction after jurisdiction. Never the same jurisdiction twice, I think. But he, at one point, a motion of his was to prevent his transfer to Pakistan. And he would name defendants like George W. Bush, who was president for at least part of his incarceration, I think, for just billions and trillions of dollars for the most absurd things. And we talked about him a little bit when I had Artie on all those moons ago, but he was a pro se litigant, and it seems like the courts were limited in what they could do because he was jurisdiction hopping. But at one point, someone found a way to prevent him not from filing legal action, but someone found a way to prevent him from pro se action, which was genius, I think. And that put a stop to a bunch of it.
That is one thing that I had wanted to mention. You talked about vexatious litigant designation earlier in this discussion, and typically that limitation on somebody's ability to file lawsuits is, to my understanding, limited to a single case. So it's easy to have somebody who files within the same case motion after motion after motion, which all have frivolous bases. It's easy to get that type of litigation deemed vexatious. But when it comes to, I guess I shouldn't say it's easy, that's the reason that designation is there, is when you have a person filing motion after motion in the same case. But when it comes to filing various cases across multiple jurisdictions, that's where it gets harder, because for Chili's case, for example, he's got a lawsuit in Texas, he's got a lawsuit in Ohio. Those two courts are not necessarily going to be in communication with each other and understand, okay, he's got a baseless claim because they're two different incidents. So it's very unlikely that he's going to be deemed a vexatious litigant in either of those jurisdictions just based off the variety of lawsuits that he's filing elsewhere. When it comes to your right to self-representation, like other rights, there can be limits placed on that. And we saw it with Kim Blandino in Nevada, where he was deemed a vexatious litigant and had to have counsel appointed for him to protect his rights as the defendant in a criminal case, but also to protect court procedure so that the case could be completed. I mean, sometimes there are these overlaps in a person has a right to legal counsel, meaning an attorney, but they also have the right to self-representation. Well, you can't both have an attorney and represent yourself in court, because if you have a lawyer representing you, the court's going to hear from your attorney, not from the pro se litigant. And in your efforts to represent yourself, if it's being done in such a way that it's disruptive or deliberately slowing the court process down, that's affecting your right to a speedy trial. So the court has to balance these various rights when there is conflict in their overlapping.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a delicate thing for sure. When you've got interests that on the face of it would seem to be diametrically opposed, and you've got to find the right balance to make sure nobody misses out on something that they're entitled to under the law. So, yeah.
For that Michael Wayne Parsons case, he had an original his citizen's arrest trial in Tennessee was in 2009, and he spent a great deal of time on the court audio trying to assert his right to legal counsel while also demanding to represent himself. And the judge is trying to explain to him the only people who can give you legal counsel are attorneys, but he's claiming, well, I don't use attorneys because they're all a bunch of liars. And so it's like you can't have both at the same time.
Well, remember what we said earlier about people who claim corruption anytime something doesn't go their way. It's the legal equivalent of a 5-year-old falling down on the floor and doing what 5-year-olds do when they're told that they can't have ice cream for breakfast every day.
Well, think about it from a scientific perspective. A hypothesis has to be falsifiable to be legitimate. If the court either rules in your favor or is corrupt and therefore illegitimate, that's a non-falsifiable claim. So it can't be disproven and shouldn't be given much credence.
Mm-hmm. Well, fellas, we're almost out of time, but I think we've had a great discussion tonight, and I can't speak for anyone else, but I've had a terrific time, and even though we couldn't get KFAR to do any live sea chanties for us, I think we've had a great time. So thanks to all three of you for joining us and lending us your expertise. Any final thoughts from anyone?
Can't think of anything, no.
I call on KFAR to lead us in promoting his channel.
I'm historically bad at this. Yeah, come to my channel, KFAR on YouTube. Like I said earlier, I'm on the old Instagram now, KFAR_YouTube, because someone has KFAR as an Instagram. Who knew? That is all, I believe, for me.
And the latest thing that KFAR started doing, which I, for one, really enjoy, is he started doing shorts on weird laws in different places. And he brought us the revelation the other day that in certain jurisdictions within this great country of ours, it is illegal to drive without a steering wheel. And in another jurisdiction, it is unlawful to fish while sitting on the neck of a giraffe. And I can't tell you how many times that's been a problem. And the last thing you want is a giraffe neck sitter bringing people together to do it all in one place and blocking traffic and whatnot. So I'm glad someone has addressed this rapacious menace.
But I think the real question from that first instance is it illegal to travel without a steering wheel?
I guess we'll never know.
You never know. I don't know. Sovcits are crazy enough to try just about everything else. I would not put it past someone to try that one of these days just to see. Blue Bacon, how about you?
I'm here. Check out my channel. It exists. I trust you all be able to Google it. Do a little search in the YouTube as well. Same company. Different parts. I know how to sell myself. Woo!
You've got the two worst self-promoters on your show right now.
Yeah, but the live stream that I did on the Depp Heard trial, I had someone who swore to me up and down that they were the terriblest panelists that I could invite, and they wound up owning the stream. So, you guys say that you're the worst self-promoters? Nah, you're glorious and good-looking, but still very not funny host is probably the worst at self-promoting. So, you guys did a better job than I could.
I don't know. Of the four of us here, I don't even have a channel to promote, so I think I have you beat in that category.
Well, you can't be bad at it then.
Exactly.
I will say, if you guys want to see or hear more of me, you can pester the 3 content creators here with channels to have me on again.
Yes.
Will do.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Times 3. You heard it here first. If you want Paul Carroll, you have to bother us incessantly. So first, subscribe to our channels, and then leave a comment on every video and every community post we make that you want to see and hear from Paul Carroll. And, maybe you'll irritate us enough that we'll actually do it. No, I'm kidding.
I'll wait for the emails that say, my God, they've demanded you so much, I just want to get you on to get it over with.
Nah, and in all seriousness, I've heard Paul's comments on some other channels and some other streams. Paul brings a great depth of experience and insight and perspective to this specific topic. So, Paul, I I won't put words in anybody else's mouth, but you're certainly welcome back on B2 anytime. And it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. KFAR and Blue Bacon, you guys are always welcome back too. So
Perfect.
Cool deal.
Well, I certainly appreciate you having me on, and I always appreciate the invitations when they come.
Yes, sir. It is absolutely our pleasure. Well, with that, I think we're going to go ahead and call it a night. But as always, thanks for tuning in. And until next time, this is Brandon Bridges reminding you the best way to be is B squared. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Make love to the microphone with your face, RT.
No.